Jeff Skunk Baxter made a name for himself as the guitarist of the Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan. That was a long time ago, but since he has evolved in many other directions. Welcome to Earth X.
Well, thank you for
Skunk.
your hospitality, sir.
It's good to have you here and to talk about something that many people may not directly associate you with.
Happy to help.
So, how did it happen that you became a consultant to the Department of Defense in the United States?
Wrote a paper on converting a Navy carrier battle group air defense system on how you might modify that to do missile defense. Gave it to a congressman who gave it to the vice chairman of the Armed Services Committee, who then called the congressman back and said, was this guy from Boeing or Raytheon or something? Because no, he's a guitar player for the Doobie Brothers. So I got a call, would I come to Washington and accept a position as an advisor on the Armed Services Committee? And I said, yeah, I guess so. And then next thing I knew, away we go.
But the concept was that you were turning something that was meant to, to attack, to basically use it as a defense mechanism. It was a peace move.
Well, it was actually for fleet defense.
Mm-hmm.
Although the system certainly had some offensive capabilities. But I read so many defense magazines and so much defense literature because I was leveraging a lot of that technology on the music side, designing synthesizers, data storage, data access, and pitch conversion for musical instruments, and much of the technology was concentric. It was tangential.
So you're going to say to me that the Army labs hold, technology that is helpful for developing music?
Where did the internet start? ARPA.
Yeah. It's true.
Advanced Defense Research Project. So
yes.
There is a connection. Technology is technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's applicable across so many different domains. So again, it's just a question. I guess what they like about what I do, why they keep me around, I guess, is because I try to look at problems and I try to look at things from a slightly different perspective.
Can you help me understand what that perspective is? I mean, I can sort of imagine that you're not the typical, person coming by in the U.S. Congress, but.
Well, one thing about music and learning to play music and being a musician is that your brain is wired in a slightly different way. It's wired in a way to support nonlinear thinking. In other words, instead of from A to B, B to C, sometimes it's from A to X and then back to L and then over to G. The idea of being able to think in one vector but in a number of different layers. So for me, when I look at a lot of problems, especially in a lot of the wargaming that I do, I look at things from as many different perspectives at the same time as I can, and then try to synthesize from that what might be a solution or a way ahead.
Is it also true that musicians are professional collaborators? They need each other, and therefore you think more in, how can we work together?
I think there's some of that. I mean, there's some great musicians who are soloists.
That's
true. Manitos de Plata, Andres Segovia, guys that, and women who, play by themselves. But certainly there is a collaboration. And then what flows from what you're talking about is when you put two or more people together, you create an analytical cell. Mm-hmm. Jazz improvisation is basically doing an analytical exercise on a theme. Each person introduces their analytical product, and then at the end you come up with something brand new.
Yeah.
So the collaborative part that you're talking about, I believe, I've even used that to teach analysis in the intelligence community. Mm-hmm. What is jamming? What is gut feeling? How do you trust that, and how do you leverage that in a way that you get a valid solution?
Would the world be a better place when there would be more musicians in charge?
Well, and there's some great guys out there. I mean, take for instance Brian May,
Yeah.
the guitar player
From the Queen.
for Queen. He just got his PhD in astrophysics.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, one of my bosses at Lawrence Livermore was good friends with his thesis manager. I mean, it's a small world. Paul Reed Smith, a guitar luthier, called me one day and said, "I've come up with an underwater acoustic detective system." So I said, "I want to see it." I looked at it, picked up the phone, called Admiral Nevin Carr over at the Naval Research Laboratory and said, "You got to see this." And next thing you know, away you go. So
it's fascinating.
And again, acoustics, music, frequency, physics, and just about every physicist that I've ever worked for or with is a musician. I mean, even Albert Einstein was a concert violinist.
Yeah, yeah. Amory Lovins. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know a few. That's true. That's true, and interesting actually.
There's something there.
There's something there. Let's talk about your other, advocacy is for nuclear energy.
Yes.
Now, of course, that is interesting because you come from a time, your heydays were, I guess, 60s, 70s, when everybody was against nuclear energy. And so you evolved, but it's therefore interesting to hear from someone like you why you think nuclear energy is a good thing.
Well,
because people are afraid. That's what I want to address.
And you're right. When I first looked at it in the 60s, it was kind of first generation and a bit of a dirty business. But like anything else, I mean, you compare the first automobile to a Porsche 911, and then okay,
what happened?
Things evolve.
Yeah.
There's a need for stable, reliable energy right now, more than any time, because first of all, we are in the world where we have fourth generation nuclear reactors that run on triso fuel, which is a coated, is a piece of fissionable material coated with a ceramic coating. It's impossible for a terrorist to use it for anything. Mm-hmm. The fourth generation SMR reactors they don't go critical. They're very safe, and they're self-contained. You just drop it in the ground. Now, if you're trying to power massive server farms, if you're trying to do artificial intelligence, if you're trying to do Bitcoin, if you're trying to do any of this, we are at the limit of what the energy grid can provide. Gotta have something else.
Yeah.
as a scientific term, yeah. Uh-huh. So when I look at nuclear power, and I've been involved in nuclear power in a number of areas, not only on the DoD side, but on the space side. Russia, for instance, has leveraged for years thermoelectric nuclear power to power spacecraft. We have too. It's a viable way to do it. It's a very reliable, and it's a very long-term. I mean, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are still broadcasting data. Yeah. And they're way past the outer limits of the solar system. I mean, this energy source and capability is something that, for me, makes really good sense. Obviously, you have to be careful. You have to be aware of what the dangers are. But in a lot of ways, much of that has been eliminated. And frankly, we're not going to move forward as a civilization unless we up the power capability to orders of magnitude.
Well, that is a very good argument. At the same time, people still say there is so much to be gained by energy savings, energy conservancy. I mean, because we waste so much.
Yes, and there's no. Again, I'm not a one-trick guy.
Hey,
I
live
in a world of gray. So
I don't like gray though.
Now, if I have some apples,
yes,
and you want to conserve those apples,
yes,
you will probably do the best you can to conserve them. Meanwhile, you got to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, there has to be a balance of that. Mm-hmm. So yes, energy conservation is something that makes absolute sense. But you can't get to where you need to go simply by conserving energy. You have to find new ways to generate it.
So you wake up every morning and you need to make a decision. Are you going to write a new song? Are you going to defend the United States, or are you going to power the world? What happens?
I look in the schedule book and say, well, am I going to the Pentagon, or am I got a recording session?
No, you're not that kind of a guy. You set the agenda. So what is your priority?
It's hard to say because I love it all. It's like, who's my favorite child, you know?
Uh-huh.
I think what drives me is the opportunity to learn, because to me everything is kind of heuristic. If I learn something, for instance, let's say I read something in a defense magazine or a specs manual on a radar, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Now, if I apply this to, maybe I can sample a portion of the waveform from a guitar string, sample that, draw the pitch, put it into a computer, and be able to use that to drive a model. Maybe I'm nuts, but, well, I know that. But I look at these things and I try to form relationships and see how you can leverage this stuff.
Yes. Are you an inventor?
Yes.
What do you like the most of what you have invented?
Things for musical instruments. Worked a lot on the first guitar synthesizer. Worked on guitar amplifiers, modeling. Things that have to do with music. And again, sometimes that flows over into, okay, I'm at Lawrence Livermore, we'll have a conversation about how do we look at new and novel ways to leverage this particular missile to do something. Well, you sit around, you got to invent a way to modify it.
So once some moons back, you were in school. What did you like in school?
I loved history because my dad was a historian. He, when I was 6 years old, my mother taught me to read at a very early age, which I really appreciate. And of course,
and I'm curious when that was. I mean, a normal child reads at 6, maybe 7. Or so.
Yeah, so about 5 years old.
Okay.
We would sit down and she would teach me to read. And then one day I was reading Huckleberry Finn with my mom. I guess I was around 6. And my dad walks in the room and says, "Oh, so you can read now?" And of course I'm a little snot, So I said, yeah, I can read. So he goes in the library, brings out a copy of Churchill's The Gathering Storm, drops it in my lap and says, "Read that." So it took me a couple of years to get through it.
I'm sure you did.
But what it did was it gave me a perspective on history and the role that history plays in all of our lives. And it's a living, breathing thing. It's not just something that sits in a vault. So from that point, history fascinated me.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as soon as I got into musical instruments, I was taking piano lessons, classical piano. And then when I was 9 years old is when I started playing guitar. And as soon as I grew up in Mexico, so there was nobody to repair anything. So, like I said, once you stick a fork in the toaster, you learn very quickly which way the electrons flow.
Yes.
Lesson number one, and wear rubber shoes. And I began to delve into the world of the actual mechanics of electronics, and so that got me more and more interested in how things work. And I became a technology fan. And of course, and I think it was around 1957 was the International Geophysical Year.
Yeah.
When Sputnik and the space race and Walt Disney was doing animations by Willy Ley, and it was a very technically focused time, and I just ate it up. I couldn't get enough of it. So I guess it kind of stuck with me.
So about history, I mean, when you get to, I say, our lifetime, I mean, we're not that different in age anymore, but we have lived a time where we saw the world coming together, and now suddenly in a handful of years, it seems everything that was coming together is falling apart. If you study history, you know where that's going. It's
a cycle.
It's a cycle.
But Alexander the Great conquered created the world at the time the world's largest empire, and they think, oh, everything's okay.
Yeah, until they were not.
You know.
But so isn't that sad that it's not so bad if the world changes and some boundaries change, but it seems that we're losing the capacity to live together, work together, and collaborate.
I think it's cyclical. I think it runs in cycles. And there's no doubt about that George Santayana was correct.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those who don't learn the lesson of history are doomed to repeat it. And we just it's like Lucy in the football. I don't know if you're familiar with the Peanuts cartoon, but yeah, until we get past Lucy in the football, we're just going to it's going to be Groundhog Day for the rest of mankind's existence.
Yeah. Well, but what do you say to your, when you do your advice, or give your advice in Congress, if they ask you to? I mean, to what extent can you contribute a sense of reason? Let's work together rather than all that polarization that everybody suffers from ultimately.
Well, on the one hand, I was lucky to have a great education. I mean, in Mexico, I went to the British Embassy School, and certainly the Brits are known for their high-level education, even in grade school. And then my parents sent me to one of the top prep schools in the United States, where I got an incredible education. So it gave me the tools to learn, not just to learn things, but to be able to actually explore. And so when I go and try to lay something out, say in Congress, you start with finding commonality. You start then to find a way to support your argument. You then look for historical examples that are difficult to refute. You don't be antagonistic. And then you finally use all that to get to a position where you can present something and defend it.
But that sounds, and then I don't want to discount this at all, but it sounds like very simple, but very basic wisdom.
It is simple.
Yeah,
Most of the world, things seem complicated, but just about everything is simple. I remember after doing a session in Nashville, I was sitting at the bar, at the Trace bar, with Harlan Howard, probably the most prolific songwriter in Nashville. I said, Harlan, how do you write a hit song? Come on, man, tell me. And he said, Skunk, it's really simple. 3 chords and the truth. Now, that does not negate Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. That does not negate anything that Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie did. But when you get right down to it, life is pretty simple. Even when you study physics, there are certainly complexities as you go down the line, but a couple of hydrogen atoms fusing into a helium atom is basically the engine that runs the universe.
So if you were, from all your studies and the broad field that you study, which is beautiful, by the way, what you want to share with, say, in this case, our audience, and say, well, this is, if you take this to heart, you'll make your life better, your society will be healthier. What's your advice? What is the lesson?
Well, one thing, and listen, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I'm just some dumb guitar player working my way through, life. But the number one thing is to listen. Most people have a tendency to want to make their point, which is a good thing, but maybe see what everybody else has to say before you jump in, because you may be surprised. It may change your approach. It may change your attitude. You might even learn something. So if you listen, it opens up some interesting possibilities. One is to learn. One is to make friends. Because people don't like it when they jump out and you jump all over them. Another is to open up, as you pointed out, the pathways to collaboration. I think if you start with that, it's hard to lose.
Thank you, Skunk.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your hospitality.